Good afternoon. What an honor it is to be here today. I'm Mayor Douglas Kindig from the city of La Vista. You're used to seeing one presenter up here, but my good friend and fellow mayor from the state of Nebraska, David Black, is with me today.
We are neighbors. We'll show our geography in a little bit. We are neighbors. We're friends, and we partner on a lot of things, but we compete really hard. I want to win every time we do a project. Just because we're friends doesn't remove the competitive portion.
Well, I guess I would say that La Vista wants to win every project also. But if we cannot, I hope my good friend in the city to the south of us does.
And that is the spirit, and we talk about that a lot. Just to give you a point of reference, if you're familiar with Omaha, we're on the southern edge of the metro area. La Vista is contiguous with Omaha. We're in a different county than Omaha. And then Papillion is just south of that, and then we have a lot of rural below us. La Vista is the newest city in the state of Nebraska, incorporated in the mid-50s, I believe.
61.
61, it was incorporated. That's the last time Nebraska incorporated a city. We have very aggressive annexation laws. And Papillion's probably one of the oldest in the state. So it gives you an idea of the demographic we might be dealing with.
All right, so to kind of tell you why we're here today, La Vista's population since the year 2000 has increased 50%. Along with all those benefits of a growing community, many of you know that it also brings an awful lot of issues, an awful lot of concerns that we have to deal with. Our volunteer fire department, long-standing tradition in the city, did the best they could. But because of our growth, our increased calls were not being matched by the retention of our volunteers. Between the years 2000 and 2010, our calls went up 150%. With all the with our volunteer fire department, it created many issues with the demand on their time from work, family, and the time they give back to the community. Many of them had 2 jobs. La Vista being a suburb, many of those jobs were not in the city of La Vista. What the problem that was caused by that was our daytime response. It became a grave issue. In 2012, EMS calls were answered at an average of 11 minutes. Fire calls, 14. Dispatch had an issue in 1 year alone. 59 times they had to double tone the call to get enough firefighters or medical personnel out the door to handle that emergency. You couldn't find a more dedicated group of volunteers. But in addition to the concern of the call times was our retention. Even though we held regular recruiting classes and they would come in, it soon became very evident to us that we were becoming a training ground for the paid career fire departments in our area. We weren't able to keep our number of volunteers that we needed. By the time the department disbanded, 70% of our volunteers did not live in our city. 63% of them had less than 2 years of service. Again, they did a great job. It just wasn't enough. So the question became, how do we provide this critical service to our citizens with the limitations that a volunteer fire department brought us? We looked at 4 options. Option number 1 was a combination volunteer paid fire department. Option number 2 was for La Vista to create their own paid fire department. Option number 3, subcontracting our EMS and our medical services. And option number 4, consolidating or partnering with an entity that already had a paid career fire department. It became evident to us very quickly that the first 3 options were not realistic. Option number 1 of the combination, because of Papillion's history and being able to do this, we knew that combining volunteers with paid would slow the transition to that paid department, and it did create some concerns and some issues amongst the 2 parties. La Vista didn't have the taxing authority to be able to create the revenue source to pay for our own fire department. As simple as that, a budget. Option number 3, subcontracting medical and EMS. Not only would it cost more, but it also took away a revenue source of ambulance billing. And it didn't address the issue of retention and response times to fire calls. It was very clear to the City Council and to myself that the best way to provide this service to the citizens of La Vista was to find an entity that could help us. Thankfully, Papillion already had a paid career fire department. They were able to listen to us, and because of that, we developed this partnership.
The idea of recruitment and retention being an issue is probably a lot that a lot of you can recognize. You're probably dealing with it now. And we dealt with that same thing. We were 100% volunteer for almost 100 years, and we had the same recruitment and retention until the mid-90s. We tried some of the different paths. In '96, our volunteer fire department added some part-time people just to have people in daytime that could respond. Worked for a very short period of time, but that creates its own issues. We then supplemented that with some full-time employees so we could cover all the shifts all the time, but still supplemented primarily with volunteer. Again, created some issues. In the late 90s, we actually approached our rural fire district, which was 58 square miles. And we said, hey, if we add some more firemen, can we provide service to you, the rural fire district? So we came up with an interlocal where we had our fire department, combination career volunteer serving both the city and the rural fire district. It was, and the way we split it, cost becomes a big issue, and you can get very sophisticated, and you can figure out wrongs for every way of doing it. We stayed simple, valuation. We didn't care about population, calls, or anything. We said, let's keep it simple. Based on valuation, it's certified every year. We'll split the budget based on that. That brought two payers to the table to raise the number of firemen to respond both to the city and the rural. A couple of years later, then, as valuation started increasing, we understood that model. Volunteers started going away, careers started being added, and in about '98, we moved to 100% career. Early 2000, we actually eliminated the last volunteer. No volunteers responding to calls. We kept the volunteers around because they're great community service partners, honor their history. They still do things for the community, but they don't respond to calls. So that brought us to about 2010 when we moved to 100% career with two stations, with the city and the rural fire district. And so we'd been operating this model for about three years. It took about 4 or 5 years to get through that transition, a lot of pain. But once we got stabilized, full career, we understood it and it got stabilized. It operated about 3 more years under that model, and we became very comfortable with it. That was about the point in time that Mayor Kindig called me. And he literally called me and said, we've been evaluating these options. Would you provide fire and EMS to our city? And it was a very simple call because we had a lot of trust established because of some other cooperative efforts to say, we already know how to have two partners dance. Adding a third one to that should work pretty well. So we went ahead and accepted the call, and our only requirement was don't lower public safety in our jurisdiction and don't raise cost. If it's neutral, I'll provide the service.
And we knew as a city that La Vista deserved to have the quality of service a paid career fire department could give us. But there were some great benefits because of that. In the first 6 years of the partnership, the La Vista taxpayers will save over $11 million. Monetary aside, and maybe the most important issue of all of this, our response time since we have combined with the city of Papillion have dropped to an average that 90% of the calls are answered in 7 minutes and 43 seconds. The volunteer department, 90% of their calls were answered in over 12 minutes. 4.5 minutes difference. I did not want to be the mayor that stood behind a podium and had to talk to the news because we lost a citizen because we couldn't get there in time.
In order to make it work, though, you have to keep it simple. One boss operationally. Everybody knows who they report to. It's a City of Papillion Fire Department, City of Papillion employees, City of Papillion ran. However, we combined a budget advisory committee where all three of us have an equal vote, no matter how much each person pays, to advise on the budget. Once the budget's approved, that's what we operate under. We combined all of our assets. We all donated our assets to the combined fire department. And so once the budget is approved, Papillion has 100% operational control except for 5 items. Acquisition of new property takes all three of us at the table to say we're going to do that. If we're going to purchase something more than $50,000, I've got to go back to the partners because it's not in the budget. If we're going to increase somebody's budget more than 5%, the levy, that's got to go back. And then if there's issuance of any debt at all three have to agree with that. So We found the absolute critical components, kept it simple, got the governance, and one runs it. And you're
And
saving
David,
$2 million a year.
and in closing, while David's here, La Vista's signing a new big project. Thanks for having us today.